Rain poured hard over Manhattan, turning the sidewalks into silver mirrors and washing the city in neon light. Under a lonely street lamp on 42nd Street, a little girl sat barefoot on the wet pavement, clutching a torn pink backpack. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, her face half hidden by an oversized hoodie that swallowed her frame. People walked past without slowing down, umbrellas up, eyes forward, too busy surviving to notice someone who was quietly breaking. The girl didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't speak. Not until a black Mercedes stopped nearby and a man stepped out, arguing on his phone about a business deal worth millions. That's when she whispered, soft enough to almost disappear under the hum of the rain. "Please, don't tell my mom." Ethan Cole froze mid-sentence. The CEO of Cole Industries, a billionaire known for building empires and breaking competitors, suddenly couldn't remember what he'd been yelling about. Something in that whisper pierced straight through the armor of his success. He turned slowly and saw her, small, trembling, and trying to make herself invisible. Her shoes were gone, her knees scraped, her hair dripping down her face. He felt his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. He ended the call and walked closer. "Hey there," he said gently. "Where's your mom?" The girl didn't look up. "She said she'd come back." "When?" he asked, but her voice was almost gone now. "2 nights ago." The words hit him harder than he expected. He crouched beside her, rain soaking his expensive coat, and tried again. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated before whispering, "Lila." Her voice cracked like it hadn't been used in days. Ethan glanced around, no shelter nearby, no one searching for her, just cold city air and people who didn't care. "Lila, you can't stay out here," he said softly. She shook her head, hugging the backpack closer. "She'll be mad if you tell. She said not to talk to strangers." Ethan swallowed hard. What if I'm not a stranger anymore? For a moment she looked up at him, truly looked, and her eyes met his. They were the same gray-blue as his own reflection. And then she said something that turned his whole world upside down. "You look like the man from Mom's picture." For a few seconds, Ethan just stared at the little girl, unsure if he had heard her right. "What did you say?" he asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the rain. Lila hesitated, her fingers tightening around the straps of her backpack as if afraid he'd take it from her. "Mom has a picture of you," she whispered. "It's old and crumpled, but she keeps it in the side pocket. She says the man in the picture used to help people before he forgot how." The words hit harder than any boardroom betrayal or business loss ever could. Ethan's throat went dry. He hadn't given a photo to anyone in years, not since before his life became all about headlines and profit margins. Yet here was this child, soaked, scared, and somehow holding a piece of his past. He crouched down, trying to steady his breath. "Can I see it, Lila?" She hesitated, then slowly opened her backpack. Inside were only a few items, a cracked hairbrush, a worn-out teddy bear missing an ear, and a folded photograph wrapped in a plastic bag. Her small hands shook as she handed it to him. The picture was faded, corners curled, the image almost washed away by time, but it was unmistakable. It was him. Younger, smiling, arm around a woman with dark hair and bright eyes. He could barely whisper her name. "Naomi," he breathed. He hadn't seen her in almost 8 years. They'd met when he was still just a startup dreamer, before fame and money changed everything. She was the kind of woman who believed in music, kindness, and second chances. He remembered walking away from her when she got pregnant, telling himself it wasn't the right time, that he wasn't ready to be a father. Now, standing in the rain, he realized the cost of that decision. He looked at Lila again, the same eyes, the same stubborn chin. "Where is your mom now?" he asked gently. "She said she'd come back," the girl repeated, her voice breaking. "But she didn't." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, pain pressing hard against his chest. The billionaire who had everything suddenly felt poorer than ever. Without another word, he draped his coat over her shoulders and said softly, "Let's get you somewhere warm, okay?" She looked up at him, unsure whether to trust. "Promise you won't tell her?" she whispered again. "I promise," Ethan said. "But I'll find her." That night, he didn't just take Lila home. He took home the ghost of the woman he once loved and the child he never knew he had. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime as Ethan carried Lila into his penthouse. The room was filled with quiet luxury, soft gray walls, polished marble, and city lights flickering through tall glass windows. It was the kind of space built for power, not people. Lila stood near the doorway, dripping rain onto the rug, clutching her torn backpack like a shield. Her wide eyes darted from the glowing fireplace to the shelves lined with awards and photographs of Ethan shaking hands with world leaders. None of it impressed her. She just whispered, "It's too clean. It smells like no one lives here." Ethan froze for a moment. She wasn't wrong. He had built a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt completely empty inside. He guided her toward the couch and handed her a towel. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out." She sat slowly, still watching him like she didn't quite believe his kindness was real. "You're not gonna call the police?" she asked. "Not yet," he replied. "You said your mom might come back. I want to help you find her first." For the first time, she looked relieved. "She'd be mad if I got her in trouble," she murmured, drying her hair. Ethan crouched down so they were eye level. "Lila, does your mom know where you are?" She shook her head. "She told me to wait by the corner store, but then, she didn't come." Her small voice cracked on the last word, and Ethan felt something heavy twist inside him. He ordered soup from the kitchen staff and watched as she ate slowly, like she didn't trust the food to stay. "You can eat as much as you want," he said softly. "It's okay." She nodded but said nothing. After dinner, she wandered to the window and stared out at the city lights. "Mom says those lights are people's dreams," she whispered. "But some dreams never come back." Ethan wanted to say something comforting, but the truth was, he wasn't sure his own dreams had survived either. When she finally grew tired, he tucked her into the guest bed, the same bed that had never been used. She clutched her teddy bear tight and mumbled, "Don't leave, okay?" Ethan sat in the chair beside her until she fell asleep. For the first time in years, he didn't check his phone or answer emails. He just watched over a child who didn't know she'd already changed his life. That night, Ethan realized something terrifying. For the first time, he didn't want to be alone. The next morning, sunlight poured through the wide windows of Ethan's penthouse. Lila was still asleep, her small frame curled beneath the blanket, one hand resting protectively on her torn teddy bear. Ethan stood quietly at the doorway, watching her breathe. Something about the scene felt unreal. This child, who'd appeared out of nowhere, sleeping in the middle of his world built from concrete and glass. He turned away and made a call he hadn't made in years. "Jackson," he said into the phone, "I need you to find someone for me. Her name's Naomi Carter. Last known address, somewhere in Queens, maybe near Lincoln Street. She has a daughter named Lila." There was a pause on the line. Jackson, his old private investigator, chuckled softly. "You tracking down an old flame, boss?" Ethan's voice went cold. "No. I'm tracking down a mistake I should have fixed years ago." By the time Lila woke, the smell of pancakes filled the kitchen. She rubbed her eyes, blinking at the sight of him flipping breakfast in a spotless suit. "You cook?" she asked with a small smile. "Not well," he admitted, "but I'm trying." She giggled, a sound so pure it filled the quiet house like music. Over breakfast, Ethan asked gentle questions, careful not to push too hard. "Do you remember where your mom worked?" She nodded. "She used to sing at a cafe. Then she got sick. After that, we moved a lot." Ethan's jaw tightened. Naomi had always loved music. Back when he first met her, she used to sing while he built his business from nothing. He remembered promising her a better life, and then leaving before he ever kept that promise. When Jackson called back later that afternoon, his tone was more serious. "I found her name on a shelter record from last month. She checked in for 2 nights, then disappeared. No job, no address. Looks like she's been struggling for a while." Ethan felt his stomach drop. He looked across the living room where Lila was drawing on a napkin, humming quietly to herself. "Keep looking," he said firmly. "She's out there somewhere." That night, as he tucked Lila into bed, she asked softly, "You think she'll come back?" Ethan hesitated, then said the only thing that felt true. If she can, she will. And until then, I'll make sure you're safe. Lila smiled sleepily. You sound like her, she whispered. As she drifted off, Ethan looked out at the city and made a silent promise. He wouldn't fail them again. Not this time. 2 days passed with no news. Ethan tried to keep the routine normal. Breakfast together, short walks by the park, bedtime stories before Lila fell asleep on the couch with her teddy bear tucked under her chin. But every time she smiled, he felt the weight of the truth pressing harder. Somewhere out there was a woman named Naomi, living in shadows, while their daughter sat safe in his home. He couldn't rest until he found her. Late one night, as the city lights shimmered through the glass walls of his office, his phone buzzed. It was Jackson. I found her, the detective said quietly. She was taken to St. Mary's Hospital 3 nights ago. Dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion. No ID, but the nurses matched the name from the shelter form. She's stable, but barely. Ethan went silent. He stared at the floor, memories of Naomi flashing through his mind. Her laughter, her songs, the way she used to say that kindness was stronger than money. And he, the man who once promised to protect her, had walked away. The next morning, he told Lila he had a meeting and would be back by lunch. She just nodded, busy feeding crumbs to the small sparrow that had started visiting the balcony every morning. He comes because I share, she said with a proud smile. Ethan smiled faintly before leaving. The irony wasn't lost on him. She was teaching him what he'd forgotten years ago. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly. He gave Naomi's name at the desk and followed a nurse down a long hallway that smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked coats. When he reached the door, he stopped breathing for a moment. Naomi was there, thinner, paler, but unmistakably her. Her hair, once dark and full, now tangled across a pillow. A soft oxygen mask covered her face. Ethan stepped closer, his chest tightening with guilt. He wanted to say something, but no words came. The nurse adjusted Naomi's fore and whispered, "She's been asking about her daughter in her sleep." That sentence hit like a knife. He reached for the edge of the blanket and whispered, "She's safe. She's home." When Naomi stirred slightly, her lips parted but no sound came. Her hand moved weakly toward him before falling back. He caught it gently and whispered again, "I'm sorry." For years, he had spoken in boardrooms, on stages, and to investors, but those 2 words were the most honest ones he had ever said. As he left the hospital, his reflection in the glass doors looked like a stranger. The billionaire who once built empires was now a man rebuilding his conscience, one promise at a time. That evening, Ethan sat by his office window long after the city had gone quiet. Below him, Manhattan glittered like a galaxy of missed chances. He had spent his life building skyscrapers that reached the clouds, but now all he could think about was a little girl asleep in his guest room, and the woman lying in a hospital bed because of choices he'd made years ago. The truth was clawing at him. Lila wasn't just some lost child. She was his daughter. Every time he looked into her eyes, he saw the reflection of Naomi, the woman he had loved and left when ambition became his only language. When Jackson called again, his voice was cautious. "Naomi's responding better. The doctors say she'll wake soon." Ethan's pulse jumped. "That's good," he said quietly. "She deserves a second chance." Jackson hesitated before adding, "You do too, boss. Maybe tell her the truth this time. All of it." Ethan didn't reply. He just stared at his reflection, wondering if he was brave enough to face what he'd run from for nearly a decade. In the apartment, Lila was waiting at the kitchen counter when he returned. Her drawing pad was open, crayons scattered everywhere. "Look," she said proudly, showing him a picture of 3 stick figures, a woman, a man, and a little girl standing under a big yellow sun. "That's my mom," she explained. "And that's you." Ethan smiled softly, his chest aching. "Why me?" he asked. Lila shrugged. "Because you don't yell. You listen. And you made pancakes." It was such a simple answer, but it nearly undid him. Later that night, as he tucked her in, she asked the question he feared most. "Do you think my mom's okay?" He hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She's trying, sweetheart. She's really trying." Lila smiled sleepily. "She'll come back. I know it." Then she whispered again, that same small phrase from the night they met. "Please don't tell my mom." He frowned gently. "Tell her what?" "That I was scared," she murmured, her voice fading as she drifted into sleep. Ethan sat there, staring at her, realizing how much pain she'd been hiding behind those soft eyes. When she finally slept, he went to the window and made himself a silent promise. No more lies, no more running. Tomorrow, when Naomi opened her eyes, he would be there. And for the first time, he wouldn't walk away. For years, Ethan Cole had been a man of power. But tonight, for the first time, he understood what it meant to be a man of purpose. The call came just after sunrise. Ethan was making breakfast when his phone buzzed on the counter. He almost didn't answer, until he saw the number from St. Mary's Hospital. The nurse's voice was calm but excited. "Mr. Cole?" Naomi Carter just opened her eyes. For a second, Ethan couldn't speak. He glanced toward the guest room where Lila still slept, sunlight spilling over her small face. His heart raced as the nurse continued, "She's weak but stable. You should come soon." 30 minutes later, Ethan was standing in the hospital hallway, staring through the small glass window into Naomi's room. Machines beeped softly around her, and she looked fragile, almost weightless, like she could fade away with the next breeze. But her eyes were open now, wide, searching, alive. When she saw him standing there, she blinked twice, confused. "Ethan?" Her voice cracked like old glass. He stepped inside, his chest tight. "It's me," he said quietly. "You've been through a lot. I'm sorry." Naomi tried to sit up, but pain pulled her back. "Where's Lila?" she asked immediately, panic flashing across her tired face. Ethan moved closer. "She's safe. She's with me." For a moment, Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She covered her face with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank God." He hesitated before adding, "She found me, Naomi. Outside. In the rain. She was alone." Her breath caught, guilt washing over her like a wave. "I didn't mean to leave her," she cried. "I was working 2 jobs. Then I got sick. I thought I could come back before anyone noticed." Ethan took her hand gently. "You don't need to explain. Just rest now. We'll fix this together." But Naomi shook her head weakly. "You don't understand. You walked away once, Ethan. Don't promise her something you can't keep." He froze at the truth in her words. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but there was nothing left to say. He simply nodded. "You're right," he said softly. "But I'm not the same man anymore." When he left the room, he sat in the hallway for a long time, head in his hands. The nurses moved quietly around him, but he barely noticed. His phone buzzed again, a message from Lila. It was a voice note. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan. The bird came back today. I think it likes us now." Her innocent voice filled his ears, and for the first time in years, tears rolled down his face. He realized then that second chances didn't come from luck, they came from listening when the world whispered for you to change. 2 days later, Naomi was strong enough to sit up in bed. The color had returned to her cheeks, though her eyes still carried the shadows of sleepless nights and too many memories. The nurse adjusted her blanket and smiled. "Your visitor's here," she said softly. Naomi frowned in confusion, until she saw a small figure standing in the doorway, clutching a stuffed bear with one ear missing. For a heartbeat, time stopped. "Mom?" Lila's voice trembled. Naomi's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands shook as she reached out. "Lila," she whispered, and that was all it took. The little girl ran forward and buried herself in her mother's arms. For the first time in weeks, Naomi felt warmth that wasn't from hospital blankets, it was from life itself. Ethan stood by the door, watching silently. The way Naomi held her daughter broke him in the best way possible. He'd built towers of glass and steel, but this was what mattered. When Naomi finally looked up, tears streaking her face, her voice was barely audible. You kept her safe. Ethan nodded quietly. She kept me safe too. Naomi smiled faintly through her tears. She has your eyes. I should have told you. And I should have stayed, he said. But I'm here now. Lila looked between them, her small hands gripping both of theirs. Can we go home now? She asked softly. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd lost. Naomi hesitated. Soon, baby. Mommy just needs a few more days. Lila nodded, then held up her teddy bear. Milo missed you too. Naomi laughed, a small, cracked laugh that filled the room with something that felt like hope. As the nurse brought in lunch, Ethan excused himself to give them space. He stood outside, staring out the hospital window at the city skyline. 4 years, that skyline had represented success. Now it just looked lonely. He didn't want to go back to his old life of meetings and numbers. He wanted something real. When he peeked back into the room a few minutes later, Lila was drawing again, this time on Naomi's medical chart paper. 3 stick figures holding hands, under a roof with a sun above it. That's us, she said proudly. And that's our house. The one with pancakes. Naomi smiled, looking at Ethan. She told me you cook now. He laughed softly. I'm learning. Before he left, Naomi whispered, Ethan, thank you for not giving up. He paused at the doorway, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm done walking away. For the first time, the air between them didn't feel heavy with regret. It felt like a beginning. A week later, Naomi was discharged from the hospital. Her steps were still slow, her body still weak, but her spirit was different, lighter somehow, like she'd finally found the strength to breathe again. Ethan drove them both back to his apartment, the city unfolding around them like a memory being rewritten. When they arrived, Lila ran ahead, pushing the elevator button with excitement. I told you, Mom, she said proudly. It's the Sky House. Naomi laughed softly at the name. Sky House, huh? That sounds too fancy for us. Not anymore, Lila replied, grinning. It's ours now. When they stepped inside, Naomi froze. The penthouse that once felt cold and distant was now alive with color and warmth. Lila's drawings were taped on the walls. A tiny robot sat blinking on the coffee table. The scent of vanilla candles drifted through the air. It wasn't a mansion anymore, it was a home. Naomi touched one of the pictures. You did all this? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded. Lila wanted the walls to smile. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ethan led them up to the rooftop garden. It was simple but beautiful. Soft lights, green vines, and a small table with 3 cups of cocoa. The city stretched out beneath them like a living heartbeat. Naomi sat down slowly, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. You always did like heights, she said softly, remembering how he used to take her to rooftops when they were young. Ethan smiled faintly. Guess I was always trying to look for peace above the noise. Lila leaned on the railing, pointing at the stars. Mom says stars are people who keep promises, she said innocently. Ethan glanced at Naomi, who met his gaze and nodded. Then I guess we all have promises to keep. The moment grew quiet. Naomi turned to him, her voice steady but tender. You don't have to fix everything, Ethan. Just be here. He nodded slowly. I'm done fixing. I just want to stay. Lila giggled softly. Then we need a rule, she said. What kind of rule? He asked. If one of us gets scared, she said, the others have to stay until it's better. Naomi smiled, her eyes glistening. That's a good rule, baby. Ethan looked out at the glowing city, then back at the 2 people who had unknowingly saved him. Then I promise, he said quietly. No more leaving. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like a man finally standing still in the place he was always meant to be. Right there, under the same stars that watched him learn how to care again. 3 months later, the rooftop looked different. Brighter, fuller, alive. Small fairy lights lined the railings, balloons drifted in the night breeze, and a homemade banner stretched across the garden wall. Happy birthday, Lila. It wasn't fancy, not like the corporate galas Ethan once hosted. It was soft, real, the kind of warmth money could never buy. Lila ran around in a blue dress Naomi had sewn by hand, her laughter echoing through the city air. Ethan stood by the grill, pretending he knew what he was doing, flipping burgers under Naomi's amused watch. When the neighbors from downstairs brought cupcakes, Lila clapped her hands. Everyone came, she shouted. Even Mr. Tony from the bakery. Naomi smiled, watching her daughter twirl in the soft glow of the lights. She leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "You've done more for her in 3 months than I managed in years." Ethan shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You kept her heart alive. I just gave it a place to rest." As night deepened, the guests left one by one until it was just the 3 of them, Naomi, Lila, and Ethan, standing under the stars. A small cake sat on the table, glowing with 8 tiny candles. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Naomi said softly. Lila looked between them, her eyes bright. "Can I make more than one?" Ethan smiled. "As many as you want." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered her wishes into the air. When she opened them again, she said, "I wish that we never have to say goodbye again." Naomi's eyes shimmered, her hand trembling slightly as she brushed a tear from Lila's cheek. Ethan reached over and held her other hand, steady and certain. "That's a wish I'll keep too," he said. Lila grinned. "Then blow with me." All 3 leaned forward, and the candles flickered out together, sending tiny curls of smoke into the night sky. Afterward, Lila curled up in a pile of cushions, her head resting on Naomi's lap. Her voice was drowsy but peaceful. "Can we do this every year?" Naomi kissed her forehead. "Every year, and maybe even more." Ethan looked up at the stars above, the same ones that had watched his rise, his mistakes, and now, his redemption. He didn't need applause or headlines anymore. This rooftop, these 2 hearts beside him, this was his empire now. As the last candlelight faded, Lila whispered through half-sleep, "You were my answer when the world didn't have one." Ethan smiled softly and whispered back, "No, Lila. You were mine." And under the quiet New York sky, surrounded by laughter, second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't need words, a family that was never meant to be, finally became one. Months passed, and the rhythm of life in the Sky House settled into something real. Mornings smelled like pancakes and orange juice instead of coffee and stress. Lila's laughter became the new soundtrack of Ethan's days, her drawings decorating the walls where once there had been sterile art. Naomi found work at a local clinic, part-time but fulfilling. Every evening, she came home tired yet smiling, her daughter running into her arms. Ethan, once a man who measured life in profits and deadlines, now measured it in quiet moments, a dinner shared, a bedtime story told, a promise kept. But the world doesn't forget so easily. One afternoon, Ethan's assistant came by with a stack of papers. "The investors want you back," she said. "The new tech merger needs your name on it." Ethan looked at the documents for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Tell them I already have my next project," he said. "It's called Living." For the first time in years, he didn't care about headlines. What he cared about was sitting across the table that night, Naomi sketching plans for a new community center, Lila building a solar robot that waved when someone clapped. Later, when the city outside went quiet, Ethan walked up to the rooftop. The same rooftop where everything had changed. He stood beneath the stars, the cold wind brushing against his face. Lila joined him a few minutes later, her small hand slipping into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Ethan smiled softly. "About how one whisper can change a whole life." She tilted her head. "You mean when I said, 'Don't tell my mom'?" He nodded. "Yes. That was the start of everything." Lila giggled. I was scared then. So was I, he admitted. But sometimes being scared just means you're about to do something brave. She looked up at him with that same calm wisdom that always seemed too big for her age. Do you think Mom knows that you were brave too? Ethan smiled. She reminds me every day. A few minutes later, Naomi appeared, wrapped in a sweater, carrying 3 mugs of cocoa. You two always find trouble up here, she teased. Lila ran to her, giggling. Naomi set the mugs down and leaned against Ethan's shoulder. You ever wonder why she found you that night? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded. I stopped wondering. I just call it grace. The 3 of them stood there, looking out over the city, a skyline full of light, noise, and second chances. Somewhere below, millions of people,